That summer was the best one of my life. Not because of anything grand, but because of how unexpectedly everything shifted. It all started as just another way to beat the heat, a routine afternoon in the backyard pool. But what unfolded that day changed everything I thought I knew. My dad had always been this quiet, distant figure in my life. He was there, always, but more like a shadow in the background than someone truly present. We shared space, we shared moments, but rarely words. We swam together almost every day that year, but that day, it felt different. The way he watched me, the silence that stretched between us. It wasn't empty. It was charged, almost buzzing with something unspoken. It was the hottest summer we'd had in years. The kind of heat that stuck to your skin even in the shade, making clothes feel like cling wrap and air feel heavy. Naturally, the pool became our escape. A quiet oasis where we could cool off and hide from the world, and maybe even from each other. In the water, my dad seemed like a different man. There was something in the way he moved. So fluid, so sure of himself. Like the water wasn't just refreshing, it was part of him. He had taught me how to swim when I was little. First, the basics. How to kick, how to breathe, how to float. Then the more advanced stuff, freestyle, butterfly, the things that required more skill, more control. But outside of those swimming lessons, we rarely talked. It was as if the pool gave us permission to just exist together in silence. That day started like all the others. The sun was unrelenting, bearing down on everything with no mercy. I remember grabbing my towel, stepping out into the backyard, and seeing the water shimmer under the sunlight like a mirror reflecting something hidden. My dad was already there, sitting at the edge of the pool, his feet dipped in, looking out across the yard like he was somewhere far away in thought. There had always been a kind of invisible wall between us. Not a wall of anger or resentment, just distance. A quiet agreement to stay in our own separate spaces, emotionally speaking. But that afternoon, something felt different. I slipped into the water without a word, letting it cool me down as I slowly floated on my back, eyes fixed on the cloudless blue sky above. We stayed like that for a while. Quiet. Still. Until he finally broke the silence. "You've gotten better," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "Your strokes, they're more controlled." It was a simple observation, but coming from him it felt like a breakthrough, like he was saying something more, without actually saying it. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, feeling the water ripple gently around me. But I could feel it, his gaze. It wasn't the usual brief glance of a parent making sure their kid was okay. It was longer, more focused, almost searching. Something was shifting. I didn't know what it was. I didn't even know if he did. But the air between us felt heavier, thicker somehow, like we were both aware of something neither of us wanted to admit. We started doing laps together, back and forth across the pool. We didn't talk, but something about our silence felt different, more aware, more connected. And that unspoken wall between us? It didn't seem so high anymore. Then something small, but undeniable, happened. As I swam past him, I felt his eyes linger on me just a moment too long. It wasn't overt, it wasn't obvious, but I noticed, and when I turned to glance at him, his face was unreadable. Calm. Still. But his eyes, there was something in them. Something I couldn't quite name, and maybe neither could he. That's when it hit me. Things weren't going to stay the same between us. The pool was no longer just a place to cool off from the sun. It had quietly become something else, something deeper. A place where two people who had always lived with silence were starting to feel something stir beneath it. I didn't know how to process it. There was confusion. There was curiosity. A strange cocktail of emotions bubbled up inside me, feelings I hadn't expected and couldn't explain. We stayed in the water longer than we usually did, swimming side by side, floating in silence. letting the water carry us. But the strange thing wasn't the physical closeness. It was the emotional nearness. Like we were both slowly waking up to something we hadn't seen before. It felt as though we were really seeing each other for the first time. Not as father and son, but as two people, both unsure of what came next. We floated in that moment. Both of us silent. Both of us feeling the tension. There was more happening between us than either of us was ready to say out loud. But it was there, lingering just under the surface, like a current waiting to pull us in. So we let the moment hang there, suspended, quiet, knowing, without a single word, that nothing would ever be the same again. It was only just beginning. The days that followed were strange, like a veil had been lifted between us, but neither of us knew how to acknowledge it. My dad and I kept up our daily swims, just like always. But there was something different now. Something unspoken hanging between us. It lingered in the air, thick and undeniable. The silence that used to feel peaceful and familiar had become charged, like every unspoken word was pressing against the edges, waiting to be set free. Each lap across the pool left me with more questions than answers, and the weather didn't help. The heat had become almost unbearable, the kind of suffocating heat that made the air feel like steam every time you stepped outside. The pool was no longer just a way to cool off. It was a necessity. We ended up spending hours there, floating in that cool, blue world. It was a place where things felt both familiar and confusing, where nothing made sense, and yet everything did. But more than just an escape from the heat, the pool had become the only space where that invisible thread between us could stretch and shift. The only place where I could try to make sense of what I was feeling. Every time I caught him watching me out of the corner of my eye, a knot tightened in my stomach. And yet, I never looked away. There was something about his gaze that pulled me in. Something I couldn't explain. I had never seen him that way before. He was always just my dad. The man who helped with homework, who drove in silence, who sat at the dinner table with a far-off look, offering approval so sparingly that I grew up craving it like air. But now, in the water, he felt different. He wasn't just my father anymore. He was someone else. Someone I wanted to understand, though I couldn't quite figure out why. The tension between us built slowly at first, like a pot of water gradually heating to a boil. It was in the way our conversations always stopped, just short of something real. The way we moved around each other more deliberately. How his eyes would flick to me, then quickly away. Even the way he swam felt more purposeful now, less casual, more aware. It was like he was noticing every move I made, every ripple I caused in the water. Then came Friday. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the concrete. I had been swimming laps for a while, pushing myself harder than usual, trying to burn off the strange, restless energy that had been growing all week. My dad sat at the edge of the pool, watching me, like he had been doing more often lately. But his silence felt heavier that day, like he was holding something back. After my 10th lap, I stopped. I was breathing hard, water dripping from my face, my arms aching. I wiped the chlorine from my eyes and looked over at him, half expecting a comment about my form, maybe even a rare bit of praise. But he didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And for the first time, I didn't look away. There was something in his eyes, something that made my pulse quicken. I couldn't name it, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine, even in that brutal summer heat. In that moment, the world outside the pool seemed to vanish. It was just us, the water, the air, thick with something we couldn't define. Then he stood up. Without a word, he moved toward the pool, that same quiet confidence in his steps that I'd always noticed, but never questioned. He slid into the water next to me, and suddenly, the distance between us felt a lot smaller than it had before. We weren't touching, but I could feel the heat of his body close to mine. The space between us buzzed with something unspoken. Something we both felt but hadn't dared to name. "You've been swimming hard," he finally said, his voice lower than usual, almost a murmur. "Really pushing yourself." I shrugged, trying to play it off. but my heart was racing. "Just trying to stay in shape, I guess," I mumbled. He nodded, but I could tell that wasn't really the answer he was looking for. We floated there in silence, letting the water gently move us. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Because the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of things we didn't know how to say. Full of questions we were too afraid to ask. Full of tension we didn't know how to untangle. Then he spoke again, softer this time. "You know, we don't talk much." It wasn't an accusation, just a truth. A quiet, simple truth. But it hit harder than I expected. He was right. We didn't talk. Not really. Our lives had always been filled with silence, thick with moments passed over, conversations left unsaid. But now, in that moment, it felt like all the years of quiet were pressing down on us, demanding to be broken. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I never knew what to say." He smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind that spoke of missed chances, of time slipping through our fingers. "Me neither," he admitted. And for a second, just 1 second, I saw him not as my father, but as a man, flawed, unsure, maybe even afraid, just like me. I saw something in him I'd never seen before, vulnerability. It shimmered just beneath the surface, like heat waves rising off pavement. The tension between us hummed, vibrating through the stillness of the pool, making it hard to breathe. And then, without thinking, I moved closer. Just a little. Just enough to bridge the silent gap that had always stretched between us. He didn't move away. If anything, he leaned in, ever so slightly, like he was waiting. Like he wanted something to happen. But nothing did. Not yet. The rest of the day blurred past us. We swam together a little longer, saying very little. But the silence between us had changed. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet we'd been living in for so long. It was something else. Something intimate. But not in a way I could name. Not yet. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the pool. About the way he'd looked at me. The way the air between us had felt charged. Like something was about to ignite. I told myself it was nothing. That I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew better. Something had shifted. And there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up restless. Anxious in a way I couldn't explain. The tension between us, the one we'd danced around all week, felt like it had reached its limit. And I didn't know what to do with it. I tried going through the motions, breakfast, chores, numb distractions, but everything felt off. My thoughts kept drifting back to him, to the water, to his eyes, to the quiet gravity pulling us closer. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my towel and went out to the pool, telling myself I just needed to cool down. But that wasn't the truth. I knew what I was walking into. He was already there, sitting on the edge of the pool, feet in the water, gaze fixed on the fading horizon. For a second, I froze. Thought about turning back, pretending I hadn't seen him. But I didn't. Maybe it was the way he looked, so lost in thought. Or maybe it was the way my chest ached with the weight of things unspoken. So I stepped forward, heart thudding, and slipped into the water beside him. We floated there. No words. Just silence. Thick. Electric. Alive. Every glance stole my breath. Every shift in the water made my pulse stutter. And then finally, he spoke. His voice was low. Careful. Like it might break. "There's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped. I nodded, unable to find my voice. He hesitated, searching for words. And then, "I've been thinking a lot. About us. About how things feel different lately." I swallowed hard, throat dry. "What do you mean?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He turned to look at me. "Really look." "I don't know," he said softly. "But something's changed, and I don't think we can pretend it hasn't." The air around us crackled. The water felt warmer, closer. I wanted to speak, but the words were stuck somewhere between my chest and throat. So I nodded again, and we said nothing more. But it didn't matter, because in that silence, something began. The days that followed passed like a slow wave, dragging us deeper into something we couldn't name. The pool became our unspoken sanctuary, the only place the outside world didn't matter, where silence felt safe, where we weren't the same anymore. Every time I thought about skipping the pool, I couldn't, because I knew he'd be there. And because part of me, the part I couldn't silence, wanted him to be. Then came Thursday. It started like any other summer day, sun high, heat relentless. I paced the house, pretending to stay busy, but my skin buzzed with anticipation, like something was coming, something I wasn't ready for, but also something I couldn't run from anymore. By afternoon, I gave up trying to pretend. I took my towel and stepped outside, heart pounding, telling myself I was just going for a swim. But deep down, I knew better. And there he was, already waiting. Sitting on the edge of the pool, feet in the water, eyes unfocused. He hadn't seen me yet. I stood there watching him. And for a moment, I wanted to turn back. But I didn't. Something pulled me to him, something stronger than fear. I slipped into the water, barely a ripple. And for a while, I just floated, silent and still, watching him. Finally, he turned, and our eyes met. It hit me like a jolt. His gaze was different this time. No walls, no defenses, just him. And suddenly, I wasn't hiding either. We swam for a while, slow, quiet, side by side, but not touching. The silence between us had changed again, no longer uncertain. Now it was thick with anticipation, like the moment just before a storm. Then we stopped near the shallow end, only a few feet apart, the water lapping gently between us. The tension was unbearable, like something stretched to its limit, ready to snap. And then, it did. He moved first, quickly, intentionally. His hand brushed my arm, light, tentative, a test. But it wasn't an accident, not this time. Our eyes locked, and suddenly, everything else, the world, the rules, the silence, disappeared. Only we remained. Two hearts suspended in water and truth, teetering on the edge of something we couldn't take back. And then, slowly, he leaned in, as if giving me one last chance to stop him. But I didn't. I couldn't. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts as he moved closer, inch by inch, until his lips finally brushed against mine. It was so soft, so tentative, like he was terrified of crossing a line we couldn't come back from. But the second our lips touched, something inside me shattered. Something I had been holding on to for far too long. And I wasn't the only one. The kiss deepened. The tension that had clung to us for days, maybe even years, finally broke. We gave in to everything we had been trying so hard to suppress. It started slow, uncertain, almost hesitant. But that didn't last. The kiss grew more intense, more desperate, as if we were trying to make up for all the time we'd wasted, all the things we'd never dared to say out loud. His hands slid around my waist, pulling me closer. And I didn't stop him. I couldn't. My own hands moved instinctively, gripping his shoulders like I was afraid of letting go. Afraid that if I did, the moment would vanish, and we'd go back to pretending. But deep down, I knew. There was no going back. We had passed a threshold. We couldn't control ourselves anymore. The floodgates had opened, and everything we had locked away came pouring out at once. The kiss turned urgent, full of emotion, hunger, fear, need. Our bodies pressed together in the water, the world fading away as we lost ourselves in each other. I don't know how long we stood there like that, clinging, kissing, caught between breath and stillness. But it felt like both forever, and no time at all. All I knew was, I didn't want it to end. Not ever. I wanted to live in that moment where nothing else mattered. Just him. Just me. Eventually, we pulled apart, both of us breathless. The water still lapping gently around us, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. For a few long seconds, we just looked at each other, the weight of what had happened sinking in. But there was no regret in his eyes, no fear, just the same quiet intensity that had always been there, simmering beneath the surface. We didn't speak. We didn't need to, because the way he looked at me told me everything. This wasn't a momentary lapse. This wasn't something that would fade with the sunset. It was real. And it was ours. We stayed in the water a little longer. The silence between us no longer awkward, just full. Full of new truth. Full of what we finally let ourselves feel. When we finally climbed out, the sun was setting, casting golden light across the pool, turning the world into something softer, more fragile. We wrapped ourselves in towels, not saying much. But the silence between us had changed. The tension that used to linger like smoke had vanished, replaced by something deeper, something undeniable. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop reliving it. Every second, every breath, the way his lips felt, the way his hands held me like he didn't want to let go. And I realized something. This was just the beginning. Whatever had started between us in that pool, it wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days that followed felt like I had stepped into a different version of my life. There was the time before, and then the time after. Before, everything had been predictable, controlled, safe. But now, everything had changed. Every thought was consumed by that kiss, by his touch, by the way the water had carried us into something we couldn't undo. We avoided talking about it at first, like silence might protect us, like pretending nothing had happened would make it less real. But it was real. Every glance we shared, every time our hands brushed in the hallway, the air between us practically sizzled with what we weren't saying. We had crossed a line, and we both knew it. Still, despite the fear and the doubt, I couldn't regret any of it. In some strange way, I felt like I had finally stepped into something honest, something I had been aching for without ever realizing it. The awkward silences during meals, the long moments of not knowing what to say, those had given way to something more. Something that lived in the quiet, something that didn't need words. But it wasn't easy. There were moments, late at night or early in the quiet mornings, when doubt crept in. When I wondered if we had made a mistake, if what we were doing was wrong. But those thoughts never stayed long. Because every time I considered walking away, every time I imagined going back to the way things were, I knew I couldn't. I didn't want to. I couldn't return to the silence. Eventually, we found ourselves back at the pool, like it had called to us, like it was the only place where we could be fully ourselves. It had always been our refuge, our escape. But now, it had become something more. The place where we had finally stopped hiding. One evening, as the sky melted into streaks of pink and gold, we ended up there again. We didn't swim. Not really. We just floated side by side, the cool water pressing gently against our skin, the world holding its breath around us. Time slowed, and all the noise in my head faded. It was just the two of us, together, unspoken, but understood. He was the first to break the silence. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, voice soft, almost hesitant. His eyes stayed on the horizon, where the last rays of sunlight shimmered on the water. "About what happened?" I nodded, heart thudding. I'd been thinking about it too. Every hour, every night. But the words wouldn't come. They felt too small for what I felt. "I don't know how to explain it," he continued, finally turning to look at me. "But I know I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." His words struck something deep in me. There was no hesitation in his voice now. Only truth. And in that moment, I saw him differently. He wasn't just who he had always been to me. He was someone I was beginning to understand. Really understand. Someone I wanted to hold on to no matter what. I met his eyes, and for the first time, I let everything show. "I don't want to lose you either," I whispered. But I didn't. I couldn't. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts as he moved closer. And then finally, his lips brushed against mine. It was so soft, so tentative, like he was afraid of crossing a line we couldn't come back from. But the second our lips touched, something inside me broke open. I couldn't hold back anymore, and neither could he. The kiss deepened, the tension between us finally shattering as we gave in to everything we'd been holding back. It started slow, almost hesitant. But it didn't stay that way for long. It grew more intense, more desperate, like we were trying to make up for all the time we'd wasted, all the things we'd never said. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer, and I didn't resist. I couldn't. My own hands moved up to his shoulders, holding on like I was afraid to let go, afraid that if I did, the moment would end, that we'd go back to the way things were before. But deep down, I knew we couldn't go back, not after this. It was like the floodgates had opened, everything we'd tried to keep inside rushing out all at once. The kiss grew more urgent, more intense, our bodies pressed together in the water. The world around us faded, slipping away, until all that was left was him and me. I don't know how long we stayed like that, wrapped up in each other. But it felt like both an eternity and an instant. All I knew was that I didn't want it to end. I wanted to stay in that moment forever, where nothing else mattered but the two of us. Eventually, we broke apart, both of us breathing hard, the water still gently lapping around us. For a moment, neither of us said a word. The weight of what had just happened settled between us, but there was no regret in his eyes, no hesitation. Just that same quiet intensity that had always simmered just beneath the surface. We didn't need to say anything. The look in his eyes told me everything. Whatever this was between us, it wasn't just a momentary lapse. It wasn't something that would fade away. It was real. And it was something we both had to face. We swam a little longer after that. The silence between us was different now. Comfortable but charged with the memory of what had just happened. There was no going back. When we finally climbed out of the pool, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the water. We wrapped ourselves in towels and headed inside without saying much. But the tension that had always been there, the tension we had tiptoed around for so long, was gone. Replaced by something deeper. Something neither of us could deny anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind kept replaying everything. The kiss. His hands. The way he looked at me. I realized that whatever had started between us in that pool, it wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days that followed felt like stepping into an entirely different life. There was the before, where everything was simple and predictable. And now, the after, where nothing felt certain anymore. My thoughts were consumed by what had happened. And every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel his touch, the warmth of the water around us, the way we had drifted into something we couldn't undo. At first, we avoided talking about it, like pretending things were the same might somehow make it true. But every glance we shared, every accidental touch, carried the same unspoken truth. We had crossed a line. And we couldn't uncross it. Despite all the confusion, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. In a strange way, I felt more alive. Like I had finally stepped into something real. Something I had unknowingly been waiting for. The awkward silences at the dinner table. The long, wordless moments. They weren't filled with uncertainty anymore. They held something else. Depth. Recognition. The weight of what had passed between us. Still, it wasn't easy. Doubt crept in, quiet and unrelenting. Was this a mistake? Were we wrong to feel this way? But those thoughts never lasted long. Because every time I imagined going back to the silence, to the pretending, I realized I didn't want that. I couldn't go back. It wasn't long before we found ourselves back at the pool, like it was the only place where we could be honest. It had always been our sanctuary. But now, it was something more. A space where the boundaries between us blurred, where we didn't have to pretend anymore. One evening, just as the sun was setting, we returned again. The sky above us glowed in shades of pink and gold, and the water shimmered in the fading light. We didn't swim much that night. We just floated, together, in the shallow end. The silence was calm now, no longer thick with tension. It felt different, like we'd reached some kind of understanding. He was the first to speak, his voice low and uncertain. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "About what happened." I nodded, my heart pounding. So had I. Every day. Every night. But the words never came easily. They felt too small, too clumsy for what we'd experienced. "I don't know how to explain it," he said, finally turning to face me. "But I know I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." His voice cracked slightly, and something inside me broke. He wasn't just my dad anymore. He was someone I was beginning to understand, on a deeper level. Someone I cared about in a way that defied explanation. "I don't want to lose you either," I said softly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The water rippled gently around us, and a strange peace settled over me. Not the kind that comes from certainty, but the kind that comes from acceptance. From realizing that some things don't need to be understood. They just are. We floated there, wordless, calm. And for the first time since this all began, I felt like we had found a balance, some fragile but real way to navigate what had grown between us. But life, as it always does, had other plans. The next morning, as I sat in the kitchen eating breakfast, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text. From a friend I hadn't seen in weeks. "Pool party at Jenna's this weekend. You in?" I just stared at it, my mind spinning. A pool party. Something so ordinary, so distant from the world I'd been living in. The message was a reminder. Life outside our little bubble still existed. I hadn't thought about my friends, not since that night in the pool. It was like I'd stepped out of my life and into something suspended in time. Now, reality was knocking again. I looked up and saw him standing in the doorway watching me. There was a question in his eyes, unspoken, but clear. "Are you going?" he asked, his voice cautious. "I don't know," I admitted, setting the phone down. "I haven't seen them in a while." He nodded, unreadable. But I could feel it. Distance. Not the good kind. The kind that stretches and strains, like something about to snap. "I think you should go," he said quietly. "You need your friends. You need a life outside of this." His words hit me like a stone in my chest. He was right. I couldn't stay here forever, wrapped up in this fragile, forbidden connection. But the idea of walking away, of stepping back into the world, scared me. "I don't want to leave this," I said, barely more than a whisper. "You're not leaving anything," he said gently, stepping closer. "But you still have to live." The way he said it, so calm, so reasonable, made it sound simple. But it wasn't. None of this was simple. "I'll think about it," I said finally, knowing I couldn't avoid the world forever. The next few days passed in a blur. I went to the party. I laughed with friends. I pretended everything was normal, but it wasn't. Nothing felt normal anymore. I floated through conversations, half present. My thoughts always returned to him, to the pool. To that night, everything changed. When I got home, the house was quiet, dimly lit, still. I found him sitting on the back porch, staring out at the pool, lost in thought. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, and I realized, no matter how much we tried to pretend, we would never go back to who we were before. I stepped outside, joined him on the porch, and together we sat in silence, watching the pool shimmer in the moonlight. It felt like everything had come full circle. "We're back where we started," I said quietly. He looked at me, his eyes reflecting the water's soft glow. It's not easy, is it? I shook my head, a small smile breaking through. No, I said. But I don't think it's supposed to be. We sat there for a long time, the quiet between us heavy with everything we'd been through. Everything still ahead. And in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, however impossible or complicated, it was real. And we were in it together, for better or worse. And somehow, that was enough.